Welcome and thank you for your time. I'm Jenny Bellamy from the University of Queensland and I'm talking to you from my home in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. My presentation concerns water governance as a real-world wicked problem involving intertwined human and ecological systems. It's based on an historical analysis of self-organising processes and dynamic cross-scale interactions in the emergence of cross-border water governance for the Lake Eyre Basin of Central Australia since the 1990s. There is a growing interest for a better understanding of the emergence of large-scale wicked problems produced by the complex and dynamic intertwining of human and ecological systems. These integrated systems are commonly understood as complex adaptive systems or CAS. CAS are not chaotic systems, rather they are inherently unpredictable and uncertain systems which are inextricably linked and interconnected in such a way that they produce their own patterns of behaviour over time. CAS are defined by interactions among constituent parts rather than by the components themselves. To have meaning, however, CAS needs structures and processes that produce recognisable patterns of behaviour. Social ecological systems are a particular type of CAS in which firstly, systemic properties emerge through dynamic patterns of interaction between interconnected component parts from local to global scales. Secondly, cross-scale interactions allow SES to self-organise and produce adaptive, dynamic and emergent behaviour patterns. Relations shape and determine the structures and functions of SES, which in turn evolve dynamically over time in response to feedback and change in the system context. Emergent properties contribute creativity, novelty and evolution in SES. They are only observable when viewed at a holistic system level. SES have memory and the capacity to learn, and they can influence and shape future system. Water governance of large cross-border river basin systems is well recognised as a complex real-world wicked problem. Godden and Eisen in 2019 identified that water governance exists as a contextual, dynamic and relational process between the human and biophysical worlds that can be contrasted with conventional top-down scientific processes. Recent studies highlight the tension between our empirical understanding of SES as complex intertwined systems on the one hand, and the frameworks, concepts and methods used to study and govern them on the other. These studies call for a paradigm shift from managing people and ecosystem units towards managing relations between and among people and the natural system. Process ontologies are emerging as a significant field of research for understanding the relation structures and processes and feedback loops that shape the dynamics and features of social ecological systems. Process ontologies emphasise the need for a focus on relations, cross-scale interactions, and their integrative and continually evolving character. Research on cross-border water governance in Australia has largely focused on policy-mandated processes to the neglect of self-organised processes and cross-scale interactions. From a process ontological perspective, the aim of this paper is to examine and explain the historical emergence and evolution of self-organising processes and their related cross-scale dynamics for water governance in the large cross-border Lake Eyre Basin in Central Australia over the last 30 years. The research methods involve firstly a theory-informed multi-method qualitative approach. involving literature review, archival document analysis, and so on. Secondly, a case study of cross-border water governance in the LEB examined through the analytical lens of collaboration and self-organisation in social ecological systems, and an historical analysis of the evolution of cross-boundary water governance over 3 decades. The Lake Eyre Basin covers an area of 1.2 million square kilometres, which is 1/6 of the total area of Australia. Water governance in the Lake Eyre Basin is a complex, multi-level and cross-border arena, straddling 4 state territory governments: the Northern Territory, Queensland, South Australia, and a small slither of New South Wales. It also involves the national government. Constitutional powers over water and related natural resources in Australia dominantly reside at the state territory government level. Over the last 3 decades, however, the federal government has become an increasingly important player in the complex arena of water governance. The Lake Eyre Basin is a large, internally draining, unregulated, that means no major dams or weirs, wild surface water river system that terminates in Lake Eyre, a large salt pan in the south. Arid to semi-arid, with a unique boom and bust desert ecology adapted to highly variable flows, involving prolonged periods of drought punctuated by infrequent periods of high flow or flooding due to periodic intense tropical monsoonal influences along the northern boundaries of the basin. It may take several months for the flows to transit from the northern boundaries of the basin to Lake Eyre itself down in the south. The basin contains ecologically significant wetlands for wildlife, including Ramsar-listed breeding habits for migratory birds. It has 2 major catchments, the Georgina Diamantina and the Cooper Creek catchment, which flow intermittently into Lake Eyre in the south. There sometimes may be long periods up to 10 years between floods or high flows. A relatively low dispersed and declining population of about 60,000 people only exist in the basin. 15% are Aboriginal and 68% of the area is under Aboriginal ownership. The Wicked Governance Challenge. As a large, remote, ecologically fragile basin with high conservation values, managing river flows across borders in the LEB is marked by the dynamic interaction of 3 dominant factors: the boom and bust extremes of the basin's dryland river ecology to start; secondly, a complex multi-level evolving policy and institutional framework; and thirdly, tensions and paradoxes over development in a sustainable and culturally appropriate manner. For example, increasing demands for water extraction to satisfy economic enterprise such as intensive agriculture, organic beef cattle, mining, coal seam gas exploration, and tourism. An understanding is needed from a systemic perspective of the emergent nature and influence of self-organising processes and cross-scale interactions. In the early 1990s, the Lake Eyre Basin water governance context was characterised by a lack of existing surface water governance processes within the basin. However, recent advances in scientific understanding of the boom and bust nature of arid and semi-arid environments and its relation to plant and wildlife ecology had raised broader awareness of the fragility of the basin's ecology within the community and scientific arenas. Growing community concerns over development pressures, however, that threatened the existing organic grazing industry were quite common. In this context, 2 unanticipated social ecological crises emerged. Firstly, in 1992, a proposal for World Heritage listing of Lake Eyre and its related wetlands in South Australia was submitted to the federal government by outsiders, that is, the Arid Lands Coalition and federal politicians from South Australia, who failed to consult the local people. In 1995, an application was made to the Queensland Government to divert considerable volumes of water from the headwaters of Cooper Creek catchment for a large-scale irrigated cotton production development, again by an outsider consortium of commercial interests from New South Wales. Both these crises generated considerable conflict and tension within the basin community, which led to the emergence of self-organising alliances to oppose the proposals. They included the Lake Eyre Catchment Protection Group and the Australian Floodplain Association, who were merged at this time. Sustained opposition made both proposals politically untenable and led to their rejection. The crisis, however, opened up the opportunity for a collective community focus on avoiding harm to the fragile basin ecology as a uniting motivation. At the same time, the federal government commissioned scientific studies and values assessments of Lake Eyre and its related wetlands. Natural, non-Indigenous cultural and Indigenous cultural values were assessed to determine whether World Heritage listing could be justified. The two crises were major turning points for cross-border water governance in the Lake Eyre Basin. Between 1996 and 2001, through government, community and scientists working together collaboratively, a more systemic and informed, self-organising and community-driven water governance process emerged for the LEB. This process generated wide community discussions on the values of the basin and the ecological legitimacy of various interests, and enabled the emergence of two major complementary cross-border governance arrangements. The first was a two-tiered, self-organising, community-driven catchment management process commenced in 1998 that linked community, government and scientists across the borders. Sometimes contentious, the process was innovative and experimental for its time. Secondly, a second process, also initiated in 1998, established a formal cross-border intergovernmental agreement known as LIBIA, which was formally signed in 2001. The outcomes of these processes were twofold: a perpetual intergovernmental water governance arrangement that formally connected state and federal governments across borders and across scales of governance came into existence. Secondly, the emergence of new patterns of relationships and cross-scale interactions at the basin level through self-organising processes that involve government, science and community working together across borders. LIBIA is a critical arrangement for LEB cross-border governance as a perpetual agreement between the Australian, Queensland, South Australia and Northern Territory governments, signed in 2001, updated in 2004. LIBIA provides a coordinating instrument for the Commonwealth, states and territory governments to collaboratively come together to raise and address water and related NRM issues that have potential for real cross-border impacts in the LEB. It applies importantly to surface waters only. The LIBIA is a critical arrangement for LEB cross-border governance as a perpetual agreement between the Australian, Queensland, South Australian and Northern Territory governments. It was signed in 2001 and updated in 2004. LIBIA provides a coordinating instrument for the Commonwealth, states and territory governments to collaboratively come together to raise and address water and related NRM issues in the LEB that have potential for real cross-border impacts. It applies to surface waters only. LEB involves the creation of a number of structures and processes for enabling cross-scale interactions. And looking at the arrows on this LEB diagram, it identifies the numerous cross-scale interactions and interconnections amongst the different instruments. The principal instruments include the LEB Ministerial Forum as a coordinating instrument for engaging participating governments at the ministerial level, and it includes a secretariat and an LEB facilitator as well. This LEB Scientific Advisory Panel is a forum to provide expert scientific and technical advice and a method of communication between stakeholders, senior officers and ministers. The LEB Community Advisory Committee provides an avenue for community engagement and feedback, and in collaboration with the SAP, or Scientific Advisory Panel, to assess the impacts of decisions and also future impacts. The Senior Officers Group was added in 2008 after a review of the arrangements, and it provides a forum for engaging the jurisdictional agencies of the participating state territory governments. Every 10 years, a comprehensive review of LEB is undertaken. There was one undertaken in 2007 and 2018, and a state of the basin condition assessments are mandated to be undertaken collaboratively as part of the agreement. In the early days of the establishment of LEB, a fourth crisis emerged in 2002 and 3, with the LEB self-organised community-driven catchment management process established in 1998 being disrupted by the introduction of a new national regional arrangement for NRM across Australia, known as NHT2. It transformed the institutional framework in which LEB and the self-organised community-based cross-border catchment management processes emerged in the 1990s. The new regional arrangements were funded under the new federal-state bilateral agreements, which created 56 state-based regional NRM bodies across Australia, reinstating the very cross-border boundaries for the LEB that the self-organised processes had sought to bridge. The self-organised and community-driven catchment management process lost its funding base, and it was replaced by 4 new state-based regional NRM bodies, each functioning as single entities under different federal-state agreements. However, the LEB as a perpetual whole of basin agreement was largely unaffected. Turning now to emergent properties of this social ecological system. Firstly is the health of the basin. Through the LEB process, 2 State of the Basin Condition Assessment reports provide a cross-border multi-jurisdictional approach to assessing the LEB's river health every 10 years. The Scientific Assessment Panel of the LEB process and the Senior Officers Group contribute advice on the design of assessment approaches and their implementation across the different state territory jurisdiction, which is quite a challenge. Assessments in 2008 and 2016 conclude the ecology and overall environmental state of the LAB are in relatively good condition and resilient to various issues and concerns. Condition assessments are contributing to an improvement in the depth of knowledge on hydrology, water quality and fish population parameters. Emerging threats and pressures for ecological health of the basin, however, include climate change and increasing water demands from potential resource development. A second emergent property is self-organising processes and feedbacks. A range of self-organising structures and processes emerged in the LAB during, often unexpectedly, in response to crisis. These included, first, alliances and networks, and secondly, boundary objects. And these refer to new institutions, basin monitoring systems and assessment report cards, and a basin identity. These self-organising structures and processes engage a diverse mix of actors through collaborative processes, and they play a critical role in enabling cross-scale interactions and feedback processes for water governance to emerge and evolve dynamically. System entrepreneurs were a very important role within these processes through engaging collaboratively both informally and formally in processes linking policy, science and community, in mobilising networks and fostering cooperation and enhance broad community engagement, in process designed to amplify or dampen change, and finally enabling cross-scale feedback processes within the LEB community as well as within more formal processes associated with the Libya. The third emerging property is Aboriginal engagement. For the first time, the community-driven collaborative self-organising processes in the 1990s gave Aboriginal communities the opportunity to have a voice in water governance in the Lake Eyre Basin. This engagement evolved through three different processes. The first was special Aboriginal forums, of which there have been 6 since the Libya was established, each lasting about 4 or 5 days. It's a capacity building instrument to facilitate discussions among the Aboriginal communities themselves on how they wish to be involved in the Libya processes, and from an Aboriginal perspective what their issues and concerns are relating to water governance and the future of the basin. The second mechanism was representation on the LEB CAC, or Community Advisory Committee. 6 of the 17 current committee members represent Aboriginal interests from the different states' territories. This engagement provides an important avenue for building relationships between Aboriginal people and other groups within the basin and contributing knowledge to Libya processes. The third mechanism was the Aboriginal rangers and traditional owners providing valuable roles in contributing local knowledge in activities of the Libya and helping with data collection and advice on monitoring for the LEB Rivers Assessment process. The perpetual Libya and the related complementary self-organising structures and processes together have been critical in firstly enhancing cross-scale interactions, feedbacks and connectivity between government scientists and communities, including integrating community views and scientific expertise into the management of the LEB. Secondly, expanding the depth and range of advice provided by the Ministerial Forum and the Senior Officers Group to better inform cross-border water management decisions within policy arenas. Thirdly, providing a means for communication between government and community, including pathways for engagement and feedback. and fourthly, providing a forum for a multi-jurisdictional approach to assessing LEB river health every 10 years. Ongoing processes for the generation and integration of diverse knowledge have also been a consistent underlying theme, in particular in the emergence of a self-organising governance capacity within the LEB community, as well as in the LEB intergovernmental process. New knowledge was critical in dealing with emergent crises and moving forward despite conflict, enabling a systemic cross-scale evolving approach to water governance, and also in framing problems in the Lake Eyre Basin for a more systemic perspective and guiding decisions about what could be done, what the future challenge and options might be. Finally, a common motivation emerged across diverse stakeholders in the LEB, frequently in community dialogues and conflict situations over the last 30 years. The common motivation was avoiding two polar positions, locking the LEB up completely or over-exploiting it.